In 2005, I moved to New York with my wife Amanda and our 7-year-old son Jason. It was the beginning of a new chapter. For us, our house was small but cozy. Tucked in a quiet cul-de-sac, the first day was hectic with all the unpacking, but by evening we had settled into the living room, enjoying a quiet moment as a family. That peace was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was 9 p. Man, we weren't expecting anyone. Jason looked at me curiously and Amanda glanced toward the door, her brow furrowed. "Who is?" I called out. A soft voice replied, "You're." I opened the door to find a petite woman in her mid-30s. She had dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail and was carrying a dish covered with foil. Her smile was warm and inviting. "Hi, I'm Claire. I live next door with my husband and daughter. I just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood," she said, handing me the dish. The scent of freshly baked lasagna wafted through the air. "Wow, thank you so much. That's so kind of you," I said, genuinely touched. Amanda joined me at the door, and we introduced ourselves. Claire was delightful, bright, bubbly, and easy to talk to, but the conversation was cut short when a man stormed up the driveway. He was tall and broad, his face set in a scowl. "Cla, what the hell are you doing?" He barked, his voice sharp enough to make Jason jump from the couch. Claire's smile faltered, and she quickly handed the dish to Amanda. "Sorry, I should go. It was nice meeting you," she said hurriedly. The man shot us a glare before dragging Claire back toward their house, muttering angrily under his breath. We stood there stunned. "Wow, he seems intense," Amanda said as we closed the door. Despite that strange introduction, the first month in our new home was Claire often stopped by with baked goods or to chat, always apologizing for her husband Mark, who she claimed had a short temper. She was a kind woman, always asking about Jason, and even offering to babysit if we ever needed her. Mark, on the other hand, was the opposite. He barely spoke and seemed perpetually angry, his cold, piercing eyes unnerving us whenever we crossed paths one night around 1 a.m. We were jolted awake by loud shouting. It was coming from Claire and Mark's house. "Why do you always do this?" It old you nada, Mark's voice thundered, followed by a loud crash. Amanda and I exchanged worried looks. "We should check on her," she said, already getting out of bed reluctantly. I followed her. We knocked on their door, but there was no response. After a few minutes, the door finally opened. Mark stood there shirtless and sweating, his face red with anger. "What do you want?" He snapped, his eyes narrowing. But we heard shouting and wanted to make sure everything was okay, I said. His expression darkened and he stepped closer, towering over me. "Mind your own business," he growled, "and don't ever come here again." Before I could respond, he slammed the door in our faces. Amanda grabbed my arms. Wrong shenanigans. Claire might need help the next day. I kept a close eye on their house around noon. His Mark loading up his car. Claire was nowhere in sight. Instead, he had their young daughter with him, a quiet little girl of maybe 6 or 7. What caught my attention, though, was the large black briefcase he struggled to lift into the trunk. It looked heavy, too heavy. As she locked the house, he noticed me. Watching from our balcony, he smiled, a wide, unsettling grin that didn't reach his eyes, then got into the car and drove off. My gut told me something was wrong. He went down to their driveway, hoping to find some clue as to where Claire might be. That's when I noticed a thin trail of red liquid led from the garage to the driveway, stopping where the car had been parked. My smack churned to call the police. Immediately when they arrived, they broke down the front door. While I stood behind them, heart pounding, the house was a mess. Furniture was overturned and shards of broken glass littered the floor. It looked like there had been a struggle upstairs. One of the officers called. I followed them up to the master bedroom. Under the bed, they found a base B. All but a handle was sticky with dried blood, and strands of hair were tangled around it. The sight made music. Head did something to her. As the police began their investigation in her. Weeks went by with no sign of Mark or Claire. Then one day I got a call. "We've arrested Mark at the airport." The officer said he was trying to flee the country. Amanda and I were relieved, but there was still no sign of Claire. That's when the police decided to question Mark's daughter about the briefcase. The little girl replied, her voice trembling, "Daddy buried the briefcase in the forest with her help." The police searched the nearest forest. It didn't take long to find it, the black briefcase half buried in the dirt. When they opened it, the stench hit us first. Inside was Claire's lifeless face frozen in a look of terror. Mark confessed during interrogation, though his story was twisted. He claimed Claire had been unfaithful, that she'd betrayed him. But Amanda knew better. Claire was nothing but kind of devoted wife and mother. Mark, on the other hand, was a heavy drinker. His temporal ways, 1G, hadn't need area Santa snap. The story didn't end there though. Mark's arrest made the news and the details of his crime sent shockwaves through the community, unable to stomach living next door to the scene of such horror. Amanda and I decided to sell the house. Before Welleft made one final decision, we took Claire's daughter, and she was in a sentinel of this, a victim of her father's monstrous actions. We couldn't bear to see her got a foster care. Before we dive into the next story, if you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to stay updated with our upcoming scary stories. Your means the world too, so please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. I'm now in my late 30s. This story goes back to when I was 14 years old. Deventho, it was one of the most terrifying nights of my life. The very thought of it caused my hands to feel icy in the month of October. It was a calm evening around 7. I was left alone in the house because my mother and sister had gone out to do their grocery shopping. When I returned at 8 in the evening, my father was supposed to return home from work. Our next door neighbor, Miss Graham, was employed by the same company as she was. In order to save money on gas, they frequently carpooled and took turns driving in the living room. I was observing a terrifying film that I had been watching, even though it wasn't the best option for someone who was at home by themselves. I enjoyed the excitement. The dark and suspenseful scenes made the house feel eerie, and I had the volume turned up to a high level before hearing them. He was startled when I heard someone knocking on the front door. He was momentarily at a loss for words. My heart pounding, it turned the volume on the movie while it was still playing, and then I asked, It's Mr. Graham, your neighbor." Waste their response that had been given. He had a voice that was calm, friendly, and recognizable, just like Miss Graham she's always been following. That he stated, "There has been an accident. Your mother called me to come pick you up because your father is currently being treated at the hospital. Currently she is upset that she's unable to drive. Allow me to take you to the hospital. I'll open the door for you." I got on my feet and my hands were trembling slightly. The sound of his voice was convincing, and he was even familiar with the name of my father and the specifics of his work. My mind briefly wandered to the possibility of opening the door. Whenever I thought about my father being hurt, my stomach turned into a knot. Then again, something seemed off. I decided to play it's if you wait a moment. As Ed attempting to maintain a calm demeanor, I reached for my phone and dialed my father's number. There is no response again. I attempted it, but no avail. When I looked at the door, I felt a tightening in my chest. The man who was outside began to knock more forcefully. "Get moving. Your dad needs you." Suddenly he yelled out, "Open the door." Urgency in his voice, event though it was familiar, seemed to be off. My instincts began to take over instantaneously. I made my way to my bedroom, secured the door, and dialed the number of Mr. Graham. He waited for him to pick me up, and my hands were shaking as I did so in a relaxed and unhurried manner. Mr. Graham's voice responded, "What is your whereabouts?" "Mr. Graham," he inquired, having a trembling voice, "as form I'm at work with your father." "How come? Is everything not a problem?" My chest sank in shock when I asked, "Are you with my dad?" He hushed it. Look, he's sitting right here," he responded, completely perplexed. "Would it be possible for you to hand him the line in a hurry?" I inquired after a brief pause. The voice of my father was discernible. "What exactly is the matter?" "My darling, there is a man at the door who is posing as Mr. Graham's," as the person uttered the words according to him. "You are currently in the hospital, and he wants me to open the door for you." There was a momentary pause, and then my father's voice quickly changed to one of seriousness. "Let me speak to you. Don't leave your room. Make sure the door is locked, and don't make any noise at the moment. I'm going to call the police. Don't hang up on me." Remained on the line while sitting on the floor close to the door to my bedroom, which was locked. The rapid beating of my heart was so intense that I was afraid it might burst. There was complete silence for a stretch of a few minutes. After that, I became aware of footsteps ascending the stairs, footsteps that are deliberate and slow. Because of my fear, my stomach became tight. There was a knock on the door of my bedroom. "Open up, it's me," Theman said, his voice becoming noticeably softer. However, I was able to discern that it was not my father or Mr. Graham. It did not give a response. The knocking stopped, and the house returned to its previous state of silence. I clenched my fist around the phone and mumbled into it, as standing outside my door with a steady tone. "My father spoke. You must not make any noise. It's getting close to the police station." Every creak of the house caused me to jump, and I remained motionless. New footsteps could be heard downstairs after what seemed like an eternity had passed. They took a swift and resolute approach. This time, sweetheart, it could be used. It was my mother who yelled out, "Open." My fear continued to hold me captive, and I hesitated for a moment. What she said was, "It's okay, there is also a law enforcement officer." After unlocking the door, I opened it in a measured manner with a worried expression on her face. My mother stood there. In the rear of her was a law enforcement officer in uniform. The police officer stated he had left despite our extensive search of the area. We were unable to locate him throughout the night. We will continue to patrol the neighborhood. While I experienced a wave of relief, I also felt a lingering fear. Who was that individual? How was it that he was able to know so much about use? And if I had opened the door, what would have been the consequences? The statement that I gave to the police was taken, and my parents complimented me on my cautiousness. Because of this, my father has stated that from this point forward, he will always keep his phone close by. Event thought the man was never apprehended. I was able to acquire a valuable educational experience that evening. Always be cautious and trust your instincts. My name is Ethan, and I grew up in a quiet... In Texas, far from the noise and chaos of the big city, your neighborhood was the kind where everyone knew each other, where kids rode their bikes until dusk and people left their doors unlocked without a second thought. That all changed 5 years ago when a new neighbor moved in. It was late summer, the kind of evening where the sky turns a burnt orange before night falls. So I remember watching from our living room window as a large, beat-up U-Haul truck pulled into the driveway of the house across the street. The house had been on the market for months, its beige siding and overgrown lawn and a sore thumb in our pristine little neighborhood. My parents were excited about new neighbors. They always hoped for someone friendly, maybe with kids around. My age, instead, we got them. He stepped out of the truck, a tall man in his mid-40s with pale sallow skin and dark, deep-set eyes that seemed to hold a permanent scowl. He wore a faded leather jacket despite the sweltering heat, and his were stiff, almost robotic. There was something unsettling about him right from the start. A didn't wave smile or even glance at any of the houses around him. He just unloaded his boxes, insolence methodically, as if he were trying not to draw attention. Over the next few days, we learned bits and pieces about him through whispered gossip among the neighbors. His name was Missa Pole, and he had recently moved from New York City, specifically from some dangerous neighborhood people in our town had only heard about in crime dramas. Nobody knew much else. He never made small talk or attended neighborhood gatherings. Whenever Isa whim, he was either fixing up his house or sitting on his porch starring, and that's what got him at the way he stared at our house at first. I thought it was just a coincidence. His porch faced our home, and maybe he was just zoning out, lost in thought. But as days turned to weeks, I realized it wasn't random. Every time I walked outside, whether it was to grab the mail water, the lawn, or toss a basketball in the driveway, his eyes would follow me. Sometimes I'd glance up and see him watching through his front window, his face expression endless, his shadow barely visible behind the sheer curtains. Don't be ridiculous. My mom said when it told her he's probably just lonely. You should go say hi. Reluctantly, I did on Saturday afternoon. I worked up the courage to cross the street and knock on his door. The walk to his house felt like crossing into another world. His lawn was patchy and brown, and the curtains in every window were drawn tight when the door opened. The first thing I noticed was the smell, musty like old wood, and something faintly metallic. Mark Hole smiled at me, but it wasn't the warm, friendly kind of smile you'd expect from a neighbor. It was tight-lipped, forced, like he wasn't used. "Tus milling at all, can I help you?" he asked, his voice flat and low. "I just wanted to say hi," I mumbled. "I live across..." My name's Ethan," he nodded slowly, his dark eyes boring into mine. "Good to meet you, Ethan. I'm Mr. Cole." There was an awkward pause. I tried to make small talk, asking him how he liked the neighborhood so far, but his answers were short and vague. "It's fine, quiet, different from the city." After a few minutes, I gave up and told him I had to get back home. As I turned to leave, he said something that made me uneasy. "Nice house you've got there," he said. From that day on, things only got weirder. I started noticing him more often, not just on his porch, but in odd places, standing by his mailbox late night, walking slowly along the sidewalk in front of our house, always with that blank expression. One evening, as a whim, standing on the corner, staring at our house for what felt like an eternity before disappearing into the shadows. Then came the photographs. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was shooting hoops in the driveway when I caught him out of the corner of my eye. He was standing across the street, holding up a camera and pointing it directly at our house. It froze. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath. I ran inside and told my parents, but when my dad went out to confront him, Mr. Cole was gone. The only trace of him was the faint sound of his front door closing that night. My parents debated what to do. My mom was convinced he was harmless, just a lonely man with some quirks. My dad wasn't so sure. "It's not normal," he said, shaking his head. "The guy gives me the creeps." We decided to keep an eye on him, but things escalated faster than we expected. 2 nights later, around midnight, I woke up to the sound of faint clicking. I crept to my window and peeked through the blinds. There he was, standing on the sidewalk in front of our house, his camera flashing as he took picture after picture. My heart pounded in. Mom, I said urgently, running to their room by the time my dad got outside. Mr. Cole was gone again, but this didn't let it slide. My dad called the police when the officers arrived. We explained everything, his starring the photos, the late-night appearances. They assured us they'd look into it, and headed across the street. To question him, we watched from the window as they knocked on his door, but no answered. The next day, 2 detectives showed up at our house. They'd gotten a warrant to search Miss Cole's home, and what they found was straight out of a nightmare inside. They discovered a room covered in photographs of our house, every angle, every window, every door. He had it all. Documented. Some of the pictures were marked with red circles, as if he'd been planning something. What was she planning? My dad demanded, his face pallid. The detectives didn't have a clear answer. They told us Miss Cole had vanished, not race of him. No forwarding address, nothing. He'd left behind everything, including the eerie shrine dedicated to our home. The days that followed were tense. Every creak in the house, every shadow outside, made my heart race. My parents tried to reassure me that he was gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching, waiting. Weeks earned into months, and eventually the fear began to deboot. The house across the street remained empty, a haunting reminder of what had